the Anglo-Zanzibar War between Britain and the Zanzibar Sultanate is believed to be the shortest war that ever happened, lasting a mere 38 minutes, on the 27th of August 1897. Following the death of the previous Sultan, Zanzibari Prince Khalid ibn Bargash refused to accept the British Empire's preferred successor and instead occupied the Sultan's palace. It is somewhat generous to even call this a war considering how one-sided it was. In this episode, we will cover a brief history of Zanzibar, the events leading up to the conflict itself, and then a brief overview of the events following the war. Hi there everyone, my name is Mohammed Najmi, and today I have for you the shortest war in history between Britain and the Zanzibar Sultanate. So let's get to it. We will start with a brief history of Zanzibar. It is believed that people have lived in the island of Zanzibar for around 20,000 years. The island became a base for traders voyaging between the African Great Lakes, the Somali Peninsula, the Arabian Peninsula, Iran, and the Indian subcontinent. Omanis and Yemenis settled in Stone Town. Later, it was called Zanzibar City, as a convenient point from which to trade with towns along the Swahili coast. During the Age of Discovery or the Age of Exploration, Vasco da Gama visited the island in 1499, and in 1503 the Portuguese Empire took control of Zanzibar for around 200 years. In 1698, Zanzibar fell under the control of the Sultanate of Oman, with an Arab ruling elite and a Bantu general population. There were three major points of trade: spices, for which it was called Spice Islands, ivory, and slaves. Slavery was their biggest trade. The Omani Sultanate of Zanzibar also controlled a substantial portion of the African Great Lakes coast, known as Zanj, and other inland trading routes. A captain from a ship owned by the East Indian Trading Company, who visited Zanzibar in 1811, wrote about a buyer examining the slaves. The mouth and teeth are inspected, and afterwards every part of the body in succession, not even excepting the breasts, etc., of the girls, many of whom I have seen examined in the most indecent manner in the public market by the purchasers. The slave is then made to walk or run a little way to show that there is no defect about the feet, after which, if the price is agreed to, they are stripped of their finery and delivered over to the future master. I have frequently counted 20 or 30 of these files in the market at one time. Women with children, newly born, hanging at their breasts, and others so old they can scarcely walk, are sometimes seen dragged about in this manner. They had in general a very dejected look. Some groups appeared so ill-fed that their bones seemed as if ready to penetrate the skin. Every year, about 40,000 to 50,000 slaves were taken to Zanzibar. About a third went to work on clove and coconut plantations of Zanzibar and Pemba, while the rest were exported to Persia, Arabia, the Ottoman Empire, and Egypt. Conditions on the plantations were so harsh that about 30% of the male slaves died every year, thus maintaining the demand for more slaves. In the late 19th century, Britain extended its influence over East Africa in general and Zanzibar in particular, while Said ibn Sultan had expanded Zanzibar's regional holdings and global mercantile importance. In the first half of the century, his successor Bargash was forced to bend to European powers and partition his land among the British and the Germans. Later sultans followed suit. By 1890, Britain had convinced the Sultanate to cede its mainland territories to Germany while allowing the island itself to become a protectorate of the British Empire by signing Heligoland-Zanzibar Treaty with Germany. A protectorate is a state that is controlled and protected by another, in this case Britain. Upon becoming Zanzibar's protector, Britain outlined two key policy goals: the abolition of slavery and the restoration of the island's strong mercantile economy. Consul General Carroll Portal's economic policy angered the Zanzibari merchants. But what angered them more was a policy on slavery, which had become integral to their way of life as spice plantations surged in value throughout the 19th century. Sayyid Ali ibn Said resisted Britain's directives until his death in 1893, and when it came time to choose his successor, Britain voiced its expectation that the next sultan be more submissive to imperial authority. This sultan was Hamid ibn Tuwaini, installed in 1893. Zanzibar was a relatively peaceful protectorate, and he ruled over it for 3 years till 25th of August 1896, until he died suddenly in his palace with cause of death not ever established. Some believe his cousin Khalid bin Bargash had him poisoned. This accusation makes itself more apparent, considering that within few hours of Hamid ibn Tuwaini's death, his cousin Khalid moved into the palace and assumed the position of the Sultan without British approval. Now let's look at the events leading up to the conflict. Khalid bin Bargash then proceeded with ignoring the British chief diplomat in the area, Hazell Cave, and started gathering his forces around the palace. Khalid had his palace secured with almost 3,000 men, several artillery, guns, and even a modestly armed royal yacht in the nearby harbour. HMS Philomel and the HMS Rush, two British warships, were anchored in the harbour. The troops from these warships were sent ashore to protect the British consulate and to keep the peace, prevent the local population from rioting. Hazell Cave requested backup from another nearby British ship, the HMS Sparrow. HMS Sparrow had entered the harbour on the evening of the 25th of August, 1896. All was happening fast. Hazell Cave had a significant armed presence at his disposal, but he did not have the authority to utilize it. To use it as an offensive, he needed the express approval of the British government for it, so he sent out a telegram to the Foreign Office that very evening. Are we authorized, in the event of all attempts at a peaceful solution proving useless, to fire on the palace from the men of war? Meanwhile, he kept on issuing ultimatums to Khalid in the hope that he would see sense and relinquish to his demands without him needing to use force. The following day, two more British warships entered the harbour, the HMS Raccoon and the HMS St. George, and with them came Rear Admiral Harry Rawson, commander of the British fleet in the area. At the same time, Cave received a telegram from Whitehall as well, which said, "You are authorized to adopt whatever measures you may consider necessary and will be supported in your action by Her Majesty's government. Do not, however, attempt to take any action which you are not certain of being able to accomplish successfully." As you see, caution was dispensed, but the importance of retaking control was asserted. The British did not want to turn the population against themselves by issuing excessive force, resulting in mass casualties of innocent citizens in the middle, but at the same time they wanted to get their control back. On the 26th of August 1896, Cave sent a final ultimatum to Khalid. He demanded Khalid to leave the palace by 9 a.m. the following day. Cave also ordered all non-military boats that night to leave the harbour in preparation for war, wanting to minimize the harm on life and property as much as possible, just in case. An hour before the end of ultimatum deadline, the following morning at 8 a.m., Khalid sent a reply to Cave. We have no intention of hauling down our flag and we do not believe you would open fire on us. This was Khalid trying to call Cave's bluff, unwittingly. Cave replied, "But unless you do as you are told, we shall certainly do so." I'm sure Khalid knew by now he had made a grave mistake, but he was too knee-deep now to back down without extensively harming his pride and his reputation amongst his men. And surely enough, that was the last Cave heard from Khalid. Now let's look at the 38 or so minutes of the conflict itself. At 9 AM, the order was given, and the palace began to be bombarded by the British ships from the harbour. Within 2 minutes, most of Khalid's artillery was destroyed, and the palace's wooden structure had started to collapse. It is believed that it is around this time, just after 2 minutes, when he was made even more certain of his folly. Khalid escaped through a back exit of the palace, leaving his servants and fighters to fight alone, probably selling them a narrative of how they were the only ones with enough guts to stand up to the British Empire and whatnot, and that he has to make certain that this isn't the last effort or something of that nature, so he has to go and escape away from this conflict. One can only surmise. After 38 minutes, the shelling had stopped, Sultan's flag pulled down, and the war officially won and over by the British. 500 of Khalid's fighters were either killed or wounded, and only one British officer was severely injured but later recovered in hospital. When the order was given at 9 o'clock, the ships in the harbour did wait an additional 2 minutes to see if Khalid would emerge. But when he didn't, that's when the rain hell upon the palace complex. Some of Khalid's men struck at the British land forces, but to no avail. The HHS Glasgow, which was the royal yacht which Khalid had commandeered, engaged the HMS St. George in the harbour, but return fire from the St. George almost instantly wrecked the Glasgow. Since the water of the harbour was so shallow, the Glasgow only sank halfway. Her crew was able to survive by climbing the masts and awaiting rescue. The 5 Royal Navy ships involved recorded differing times for the exact point at which the last shots were fired, which results in the uncertainty over the precise duration, because it said it's either 38 minutes or 42 minutes, so it's just that time period, but still it was the shortest war in military history. Apart from the 500 and so Zanzibarians being killed or wounded, most of the dead were from the palace. Exact numbers aren't known, but Khalid's artillerymen were apparently decimated. Chaos erupted once more when several townspeople partook in an opportunistic looting. 20 more people died as a result, causing the British authorities to send 150 British Sikh troops to restore order. And that was it. That was the end of the conflict within 38 minutes. After that successful campaign and thorough dislodging of Khalid, the British placed a more friendlier sultan again, Sultan Hamoud, on the throne of Zanzibar. Sayyid Hamoud ibn Muhammad promptly agreed to all British terms regarding his position and accepted without question the British demands concerning the abolition of slavery. He ruled for 6 years. With Zanzibar having suffered gravely at the hands of a mere fraction of the British Empire's military power, no further revolutions occurred on the island until Britain relieved it of its protectorate status in 1963. Zanzibar now is an insular semi-autonomous province which united with Tanganyika in 1964 to form the United Republic of Tanzania. As for Khalid bin Bargash, well, as I said, he managed to escape. He escaped with few loyal followers to the local German consulate. The Germans permitted Khalid to live in exile on the mainland in Dar es Salaam. When the British forces invaded East Africa in 1916, Khalid was finally captured and taken to St. Helena. After serving time, he was later allowed to return to Mombasa in East Africa, where he died in 1927. And as for Khalid's civilian supporters that were in Zanzibar who didn't manage to escape, the British forced them to pay reparations covering the cost of the short war and for the damage caused by the looting, all of which amounted to around 300,000 rupees. So that was it, the long and short of it, or mainly the very short of it. Not much of a war, but still considered one, ending in total British victory. And considering the short length of it, it was still bloody. I hope you all enjoyed listening to this episode. Please check the suggested reading for this episode to give you a brief idea about the context of this event and also a glimpse of the brutal slave trade of East Africa. Also, if you like this episode, please make sure to share it with others and subscribe to the podcast. Until next time, take care, be good, and thank you so much for listening.